Greetings, America. Welcome back. As promised, I was going to do more of these, and as another promise, I'm going to try to keep them around 20 minutes or less. And as a third promise, I got to get my stuff set up so that I can do these in a more professional setting to include possibly more professional backgrounds and possibly even better editing software. But without further ado, since it's been a while since I was posting videos. When I finally did post one, I did finally get some feedback. I had comments left. I had people comment to me in person. So I don't think anybody commented on Facebook or Instagram. So without further ado, so first and foremost, when I made that video and got it to the point where I could post it, I don't think the Marines and sailor had been killed yet. Over the weekend, I had a get together with my home brewing club, both Friday night and Saturday. And in an ironic twist, my home brewing club is kind of also like my social club. The majority of us are either retired or on active duty, with a handful of full-blown civilians. So we've got a mixture of people, and funny enough, we don't all see eye to eye on everything. So as I was saying, I posted the video before the mass casualty event that took place in Afghanistan, that resulted in the death of 12 Marines and one sailor. So that being said, there were some thoughts and opinions on that. And as we batted around several ideas, I think what comes to mind, and I'm trying to think of the most delicate way to put this: Marines, soldiers, sailors, and airmen, and contractors and whatnot die on a regular routine basis over there in Afghanistan. It's just dangerous. It's a dangerous place. It's an unwelcoming place. And as I've said before, the vast majority of the population that I've seen where I was at didn't really seem to care about us. And there's several books published on it, but the topic is called the incidental insurgent or the incidental terrorist, and that's somebody who just lives in a war-torn country, who just wants to go about their day, and it basically, for the right price, is willing to work for anybody. I mean, in this case, if the coalition is willing to compensate him or her, they'll work for us. If the Taliban makes a better offer, whether it's a better threat, better financial offer, they'll work for them. And I think what made this event so unique was the number of lives lost, and not just the number of lives, but the circumstances surrounding the loss of life. These were service members that had to go back into the country of Afghanistan to facilitate safeguarding people who were no longer safe, because the way that it's being presented is though the Americans completely withdrew from the country, but it was like a drop everything and leave. And I'm just going to speak on optics. I'm not going to speak about whether I know anything, don't know anything. I'm not in the service. I've been retired for over 6 years, so I don't know how that retrograde took place. And I also want to make a very distinct point. In order for us to go into Iraq, former President George Bush had to turn Afghanistan over to NATO. Now, yes, the United States more than likely shouldered the 90% to 80% burden of supporting actions, NATO actions in Afghanistan. But NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that meant that there were multi-nations, several nations operating in Afghanistan. So when we start talking in terms of, well, the U.S. pulled out, and there was this utter lack of security, and all these lives are being threatened, and people are dying, and the Taliban took over, and I'm not trying to defend President Biden, but what happened to all of the other allies that were there? What happened to all the other nations that were operating with us? or had everybody effectively pulled out, and this was a NATO campaign on paper, but it was 100% American? These are questions I don't know. And I don't know because I'm willing and woefully ignorant. I just, now that I'm no longer in the service, it's not my life, and I don't dedicate my life to that. Now I have a new focus. I've got a new dedication for my civilian life. So, that's an interesting question, because if it was still a NATO campaign, if it was still a NATO security mission, that would imply that there were other nations involved, but that once again the U.S. was shouldering the burden of a 75 all the way to 95% participation. So, in the event that the U.S. did withdraw, the other forces were not in position to defend themselves as thoroughly as before. And I can't deny that the administration maybe underestimated the the capacity of the ANA and the ANCOP. Jocko Willink, I do apologize, sir, if I can't pronounce your name right. He posted a video of how the press conference should have gone, where basically he was demonstrating, competency. He was demonstrating, his whole premises, which is extreme ownership, like how the president should have taken ownership of it. And I know Dan Crenshaw has been very, very critical on stuff like Instagram and whatnot, and possibly even the news. I typically don't watch the news anymore because it's filled with nothing but what comes across as propaganda. It's either left-leaning propaganda or right-leaning propaganda, and I just choose not to get involved because it's like all I'm going to do is get angry. And criticize me all you want for that. It's just, that's my choice. I'd much rather watch the Weather Channel. You can't politicize the weather, all right? Rain is rain. Wind is wind, all right? It is what it is. But that does leave the question as far as, was the withdrawal done appropriately? Was the withdrawal hasty? And if I didn't say it before, I'll say it again. While I don't like Biden, I don't like his administration, I don't like the Democratic Party, he's also the quarterback for a team. Now, remember, a team has both offense, defense, and special teams. Kickers, punt returners, blockers, wide receivers, you name it. But the quarterback always suffers the brunt of the blame for everything that goes bad, and then vice versa, gets all the acclaim when everything goes great. But if this was a blown game, if this was a bad mission, there were offensive linemen not blocking, there were receivers not catching the ball or running their assignments, running backs and tight ends, hopefully you get the football reference. But that means as an administration, somebody didn't do their job, somebody missed their assignment. My friends and I were talking, and the general consensus was, after about 10 years, we were done. I had I'm not going to drop any names because I don't think it's appropriate, but I had a guy who'd been in since the 80s. He was a grunt, sniper, then recon, and then grandfathered into MARSOC. So he'd been there, done that. I had another guy who was a grunt for a while, and then eventually was one of the first ANS classes and class 1 for the MARSOC school. So he's been and done some things. Then I had myself and another buddy. We've done multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan in various capacities. My other buddy was there. He retired before he had a chance to go to Iraq or Afghanistan. I had another buddy who'd at least been to Afghanistan. And, so we'd all been there. We'd all seen, we'd all been to Iraq, Afghanistan, other places. We've all done things. And I think my comment stays the same. And I apologize if I'm not the most eloquent person to do it, but we should have downsized our presence a long time ago. Yes, is it entirely plausible to underestimate the Taliban's resiliency or the Taliban's capabilities? Is it also possible to overestimate the local Afghan leadership? Without giving anything away, and with hopefully I won't get in trouble for this, but one of the things that was widely known is at a certain level of leadership, like company, battalion, and higher, it was all part of a mafia style corruption. All right, it was less about our military system where, it was all about capability and maybe a pinch of who corruption, etc. I'm not going to deny that stuff doesn't happen in our military. So people who had positions of authority usually came from wealthy families, and there were dope deals being made, so the bottom line is they had to want it for themselves, and the speed and intensity with which the Taliban took over, it just goes to show you that the lack of I give a shit was rampant. And I'm just paraphrasing it, and if there's a difference in opinion, that's what these videos are for. I welcome the conversation. Somebody had posted negotiating with terrorists. On the surface, that's a very strong and valid point. Whether the Trump administration or the current administration negotiating with the Taliban. Yeah, interesting point. Now, I'll play the devil's advocate. What role, if any, did the Taliban have to play in 9/11? I don't know. Osama bin Laden's self-made Al-Qaeda, or Al-Qaeda, however you want to pronounce it, took credit for the events of 9/11. The rumor back in the day, some 20 years ago, was that they were provided safe haven to operate in Afghanistan by a group known as the Taliban. What we know about the Taliban is that they are religious zealots. They destroyed archaeologically significant structures, essentially that predated Islam, Christianity, possibly even Judaism, due to their religious fanaticism. So they are religious zealots. They have a unique view of the world, and they do lead with a heavy hand and a strong fist. To the Western world, we would vehemently disagree with how they do things, but I think what both administrations may have come to the conclusion of is there's no better option. The country is not doing it for itself. The leaders are too corrupt. The factions within the leaders are too corrupt. That ultimately the only thing that will probably prevail is the Taliban. And therefore that may have been why the Trump administration and subsequently the Biden administration has been negotiating with the Taliban. And who knows, maybe the Taliban, in spite of their virtues that are not seen favorably by Western nations, maybe the Taliban want to be seen as a legitimate form of government, a legitimate body. I'll admit to being a little confused between Taliban and Pashtuns, and whether the Pashtuns have anything to do with northern Afghanistan or not, but only time will tell. So what I'm not going to say plead the fifth. I'm going to plead ignorance on that one. That perhaps now that I'm out of the service, and I'm not a high-ranking member in the service or the intelligence community, that perhaps there's stuff that we just don't know, and there's a rhyme and reason for that. In my last video, I mentioned optics. Tragically and truthfully, sometimes things happen for a reason, a very well thought out reason, regardless of how it looks or how it appears. And the sad thing is our news media has a bad tendency of reporting in such a way that they can distort the truth to basically tell their own version of the story. So I'll just leave it at that. For my friend that answered that, hope you understand where I'm going with it. I'm not trying to tear you apart at all. That's not. I'm saying maybe, just maybe, there's something going on behind the scenes, and when no other viable options left on the table, it gets to the point where it's like, are you fucking kidding me? The Taliban's our best option. And that's all I can really come up with. Again, with the loss of life, I think what made it so significant was the numbers and the circumstances. Because we talked about it over the weekend. It's like, service members and contractors and whatnot die almost routinely, but nobody bats an eye. Why is this such a big deal? And it's like, well, let's think about it. We're coming up on the 20th anniversary. The U.S. just executed a horrific withdrawal, a piss poorly executed and a piss poorly planned withdrawal that resulted in the Taliban sweeping in, taking over gear and equipment that could ultimately fall in the hands of adversaries like China and Russia. And because U.S. forces had to go back in, since they had to go back in, it resulted in the loss of 13 service members. I think maybe that's why it's getting so much attention. Whether or not there's a dispute between the Taliban and ISIS, and it's one of those, well, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, I don't know. I'll have to wait and see how that plays out and what the actual truth is. How the administration's handling it. It's hard to say, because that would require me to overcome internal biases. And since I don't like the Democratic Party, and since I don't like Joe Biden, I'm finding it very hard to be objective, even though I find it hard to disagree. Excuse me. I find it hard to disagree, and all my friends agreed too. At some point in time, you have to call end of mission. At some point in time, you got to be like, this is a dry hole. We keep digging and digging and digging, and there's nothing in this hole. Or at the very least, reduced our presence to what was appropriate and reduced our mission to what was appropriate to maintain some measure of security and stability. And we even agreed on that, in which case that may have been botched. And then lastly, with this battalion commander from out here in North Carolina, in 2 minutes or less. Growing up in the Marine Corps, the officers on the surface appear to get a lot of privilege. They appear to get a lot of creature comforts, and they also appear to have a lot of authority. Whether any of that has to do with legacy, whether any of that has to do with nostalgia, or whatever the case may be, it is what it is. Ultimately, the powers that be had to determine who was going to be in charge, and they had to determine who was going to be the labor force. So the enlisted side of the house is primarily the labor force, because we're contracted, and we serve contracts. All right, we re-enlist for contracts. Officers, if they survive the point of career designation, then their service is indefinite. As long as they continue to get promoted to the right ranks, they can continue on until they're done. You just have to be a general officer, I think, by the time you've got 30 in, because as a full bird, you're done at 30. So there's a cap, and I think each rank has its own cap. For this lieutenant colonel to voice his opinion, as a lieutenant colonel, he knew full and well the consequences of his actions. He knew full and well what would happen if he spoke about disliking the flavor of the Kool-Aid. If you're an outsider and you don't understand, there's nothing I can really do to convince you. Was it bold? Was it brave? Sure, it's all those things. Was it career suicide? Yes. In previous videos, I've made it clear that as a leader of Marines, both enlisted or commissioned, part of your job is to take a dog turd, put frosting on it, and go, hey, look, guys, cupcakes. All right? And part of the way that works is you make your concerns known to people above you. In Saving Private Ryan, Tom Hanks had the best line ever about leadership. Complaints go up, they don't go down. You can let your real thoughts and opinions known to your equals and your higher. You can never let your real opinions known to your lessers. And without knowing the guy, without knowing his deeper thoughts and his deeper motivations, all I can say is, as a lieutenant colonel, he was smart enough and he was knowledgeable enough to know that there would be consequences for his actions. And as long as he was well aware of that, and if maybe that was his intent, then so be it. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to, you know, look at it as a long ball hitter. Just because he told the truth, you know, just because he said what was on his mind, and, you know, whether or not he's got a valid point or a valid reason, if he wanted to preserve his career at least until 20 or potentially get promoted any higher, it's not any different than any civilian job. There's a right way to do it, and, well, that video may not have been. Just like my job, you know, depending on the videos I make, they may adversely affect my job, which is why I choose to leave certain things out of my videos so that they potentially don't affect my job. So there's that. You have a difference in opinion. You have some different thoughts or different views. You want to get involved, by all means, hit me up. Whether you see me in person, post something on Facebook, post something on Instagram, or leave a comment under the video. As far as the YouTube's concerned, you know, hit like if you like the video. Hell, hit dislike if you didn't like the video. Subscribe if you want to. But ultimately, regardless of all that stuff, let's continue these conversations. Let's continue to reciprocate, because, you know, at the risk of repeating myself, that's the only way we're going to change anything is if we can overcome differences and begin to, you know, meet at the table and talk again. So that's all I got on that subject. Look forward to another video here soon.